Guys, I've got some really beautiful news. It's so beautiful. I've got tears in my eyes as I record this. All of Australia's former Prime Ministers, barring one traitor, have got together to condemn Hamas and respectfully, democratically suck off Israel. Let's have a look at this statement. We condemn the cruel and murderous attack on Israeli families by Hamas on October 7th. After raining thousands of rockets down on Israel, Hamas terrorists invaded and kidnapped and murdered 1,400 Israelis. It was the single largest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. We call for the unconditional release of all the hostages taken by Hamas. The Hamas terrorists sought to horrify and etc., etc. And because October the 7th was a very bloody day, including for some Jewish comrades of mine, I do not condemn their condemn, whatever that means. However, it does, to my mind, bear mentioning that since 2006 or 2007, depending on who you ask, when Israel began its blockade of Gaza, people living in there, Palestinians, have been unable to get in or get out, with very rare exceptions in the form of permits. They have been unable to trade in or trade out. They exist in food scarcity, barely surviving on starvation rations. 90% of their water supply is poisoned. And Israel conducts regular massacres on the people in there. Now, the currently rapidly unfolding massacre is taking place, we're aware, in retaliation for the unprecedentedly bloody attack that Hamas were able to launch on October the 7th. However, many of the IDF's many attacks on Gazans have been triggered by them, and often they take place under the pretext of mowing the grass, as they say. Mowing the grass, that is, in an area that has 2.2 million people, crammed into a pocket of land that is constantly shrinking as Israel push further and further into it, with a population density higher than that of Tokyo, and around half of that population is children. So we're talking about 1 million children, and so far, in just under a month of indiscriminately carpet bombing corridors along which refugees are fleeing, hospitals, churches and refugee camps, the IDF so far has managed to kill 3,600 of those children at least, and counting. So it isn't hard for me to say that Gaza is a concentration camp and what is unfolding is attempted genocide. But I understand that I'm not a former head of state, so I expect slightly more diplomatic aplomb from our assembled former leaders in addressing Israel's rapidly unfolding war crimes. Let's look at what they had to say to Israel or about them once they were done breathlessly condemning Hamas. On the battlefield in Israel and Gaza, we do not presume to give strategic advice to Israel, but the legitimate objective, of defeating Hamas must be accompanied by support and protection, for the civilian population of Gaza. Now, Israel promises it will do all it can to avoid civilian casualties. We urge it to do so, with all of its humanity and skill. We are horrified by the thousands of deaths and injuries inflicted on innocent Palestinian civilians, including many, many Palestinian children. See, look, I won't even say by who. It just happened. Natural causes. Just a ladder fell on thousands of kids. Thousands of ladders all fell at once. So brave, these beacons of courage and humanitarianism, to make such a bold statement. Paul Keating is the only living ex-Prime Minister to have not signed this group statement. He said, for one, that he doesn't do groupthink, his words not mine. But he also said that after initially refusing the first draft, his name was put in the paper anyway. And at that point, he rage quit the entire thing. And he said, I don't want to be part of this shit. He had also said that he was contacted to take part in the statement by this guy, Mark Liebler, who is the chairman of the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council. I believe we'll be making mention of him later on. But I digress. It occurred to me that the blockade and permanent internment of Gazans as political prisoners by Israel has taken place over the prime ministership of these 6 brave heroes of the downtrodden, which is interesting. So I thought that I would look back at their prime ministerships in brief and remind myself and all of you what they were all like with respect to Israel. First of all, this guy described himself as an unapologetic friend of Israel's, and he consistently voted in favour of Israeli and against Palestinian interests at the United Nations. In the year 2000, Palestinians launched the Second Intifada, or uprising, which was an initially peaceful protest that was put down brutally by the IDF. 47 Palestinians killed in the first 5 days. That's when it escalated into a bloody conflict, and in the end, thousands died. But for all that, Howard once said, "I have always greeted with extraordinary scepticism the criticisms that have been made about the alleged intransigence of the people of Israel and the governments of Israel on this issue." And for his unflinching loyalty to Israel in the halls of the UN, Howard eventually received a little forest named after him on occupied lands. How beautiful. After Little Johnny, we had Kevin Rudd, who has possibly the only partially redeemable record out of all of these people when it comes to Israel. Rudd very quickly increased aid to Palestine to the degree that for a time we became among the top 10 of nations supplying aid to Palestinians. And he also did an about-face on our dismal Howard-era record of voting against Palestinian interests and in favour of ultra-Zionist Israeli interests at the United Nations. And for a time there, we had a pretty impressive voting record in the UN for all fucking good that does. Mind you, in 2008, Israel launched what they call Operation Cast Lead in response to what may or may not have been Hamas rocket attacks. They killed 300 kids, as they're wont to do. And what was our response at the time? Well, Rudd was on holiday, so Gillard was in as acting Prime Minister, and she said, clearly the act of aggression was engaged in by Hamas, which commenced shelling with rockets and mortars into Israel. That is what breached the ceasefire, and Israel responded. Oh, well, in that case, it's fine then. Rudd got embroiled in a rare bit of tension with Israel because he kicked out an Israeli diplomat after it was found that Mossad, Israel's spy agency, was manufacturing fake Australian passports in order to orchestrate an assassination of a Palestinian person, a Hamas member, who was staying in a hotel room in Dubai. Sounds like bullshit, doesn't it? No, it's all 100% true. What they did was they took the names of 4 random dual passport holding Australian Israelis and put their names on the passports, the fakies that they gave to the assassins, who then went and murdered the Palestinian. So, when they found out that the diplomat, I assume, was involved, they kicked him out. Kevin Rudd maintains to this day, and has written about this in one of his books, that this led to him getting in the bad books of Mark Liebler. You recall him before the head of AJAC, the Australian Israel Jewish Affairs Council. As Rudd recalls it, Liebler said to him, "Julia is looking very good in the public eye these days, Prime Minister. She's performing very strongly. She's a great friend of Israel, but you shouldn't be anxious about her, should you, Prime Minister?" To his credit, apart from always insisting that this is quite literally a true statement made to him by Liebler, Rudd has always also insisted that this is not him trying to seed an anti-Semitic power conspiracy about a very powerful Jewish businessman. Rather, what he's saying is that this is testament to the power of the Israel lobby in Australia. And if Gillard was favoured by the pro-Israeli ultra-Zionist lobby in Australia, then her prime ministership, after she deposed Rudd, stands testament to that. Bob Carr was foreign minister when Gillard was in power, and he's always been a pretty rare presence for someone in power in a ministry in Australia. He's always been very vocal in support of Palestinian statehood and against the oppression of the Palestinians. Quite rare for a minister. In a book he released afterwards about his time in the position, he described his difficulty trying to strike a chord or really get Gillard to move on any matters regarding Israel and Palestine. And he even explained by leaking text exchanges in this book that he couldn't even use the terminology express concern with respect to Israeli West Bank settlements. That's bulldozing Palestinian homes and moving in ultra-Zionists into homes in their stead because of the fear of offending Mark Liebler's Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council. Anyway, the steaminess for Israel turned up a notch with this guy. This guy was an absolute Israel fan, like big fan of Israel. Big fan. In fact, he's listed on this cooked website called israelallies.org as a friend of Israel, which is nobody normal is in this list, I'm telling you now. In 2014, Israel launched something called Operation Protective Edge. Who minds the details? Look, they killed 500 kids, including 4 young boys. There were 4 cousins from the same family. They were playing football in a patch of Gaza, and they were shelled and all 4 kids died. That got a bit of attention from a little while, but then everyone quickly forgot because no one really gives a shit in the world at large about Palestine. What did Abbott have to say? He said that the Israeli government's decision-making was, not flawless, but, if everyone could just accept the state of Israel, then all this tension and conflict would be done, If only those 500 dead kids, could acknowledge Israel's right to exist. After he was out of power and he could more freely express his love for Israel, he said Australia should cut off its aid to Palestine, because they're all terrorists. Now, I know centre-left libs like to sort of fantasise about this guy being the centre-left for a while, the sensible centre or something. But he did host the murderer Netanyahu in Australia. And then he went over to Israel to spend some time with Netanyahu. So they really palled it up. He once said that they shared an enemy of militant Islamist terrorism. You recall that was the time at which, Muslim Australians and Muslims all around the world in Western countries were getting harassed and harangued by racists. And then we had this idiot who promised a return to the kind of full-throated Israeli endorsement of the crazed Christian fundamentalist kind that we had back with Abbott. He managed to piss everyone off by following Donald Trump in recognising West Jerusalem as Israel's capital. However, he didn't go so far as Donald Trump did in moving the embassy over there. This is a move that's since been reversed by Albanese. It's a controversial move because it removes any suggestion that the negotiation behind Jerusalem being the capital should be between the Palestinians who occupied it before the Israelis and the Israelis. It's essentially seen as participating in killing off the Palestinians' claim to their own land. Now, in absolute desperation, after nearly 20 years of being starved of life, blockaded, unable to get in or out, massacred routinely, driven to despair, the beautiful people of Palestine staged a peaceful, overwhelmingly peaceful, non-violent resistance campaign called the Great March of Return, which is simply, as it said, a march to the border of the concentration camp to demand to be allowed free and back onto their homelands. Israel responded by using military snipers to shoot children, that's intentionally, and disabled people and journalists and health workers. They targeted people in the kneecaps, knowing it would not only stop their ability to march, but would permanently incapacitate them, which, when you come from Gaza, is an absolute death sentence. What did Morrison think about this kind of thing? Well, you don't have to observe these UN reports. After all, the UN are just anti-Semites. And then when Amnesty in 2020 asked Australia to condemn Israel after releasing a damning 280-page report accusing Israel of actively waging apartheid against Palestinians, he goes, no country's perfect. Classic bit of Morrison finesse, hey? Honestly, I think there's only one person here who should be able to sleep at least somewhat soundly at night when reflecting on their prime ministerial track record over Israel and Palestine. The rest of them I consider secondarily responsible for the deaths of countless Palestinians over their tenure as Prime Minister. I mean, primary responsibility will, of course, always lie with the government of Israel and its army, but make no mistake, it is Israel's international pals in power who greenlight that brutality. This lot are responsible for ignoring what happened while they were in power. They were responsible for obfuscating the countless Human Rights Watch reports decrying Israeli ethnic cleansing that came out over their tenure, only a handful of which I've referenced in this video. Sometimes they were responsible for actively running cover for what Israel were doing, or responsible for caving before powerful Zionist lobbyists at the expense of dead children. The blockade and political imprisonment of innocent Gazans for almost 20 years, it represents only a snapshot of the full story of brutality visited upon Palestinians since 1948. But it's our snapshot. It's modern. It's happened in our time. And our leaders sat by and let it happen. They lied and lied and lied and span and span and span while we all watched on. If you understand this about Israel's powerful friends, our leaders, you shouldn't need to be told that speaking truth to power is not possible here, nor is it the goal, because power doesn't listen here. We need to bully those in power in Australia to fight for Palestinians, what we want, because these people prove that they will not do it of their own accord. So we need to build power from below. That's the political aim of rallying and BDS and so on and so forth, through fomenting a popular movement that says no to ethnic cleansing. We can apply pressure to our leaders. That's why you need to attend grassroots actions and figure out how to contribute. Please head to the APN website, that's the Australia Palestine Advocacy Network, to find out about upcoming rallies in your city, find ways to donate, and also to learn about what other actions you can take. Please visit it today, because Palestinians need you to force your leaders to grow a spine. If you like that my content is independent as fuck and you want to support me to keep making it, then after you're done donating to Palestinian causes, chip in a clam at patreon.com/TomTanuki. I'd appreciate your support.